Any? Okay, are there any questions before we start the class? Okay, well, welcome back. And we have, as you probably know, a guest with us this evening. Trying to think how to introduce our guest tonight. William a man who needs no introduction. William Bulger was born in South Boston, and in 1960 he was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, where he represented South Boston for the next 10 years. In 1970 he was elected to the Massachusetts State Senate, where he remained until 1995. And he served for 18 years as the president of the Massachusetts State Senate, which, as I've indicated, is one of the most important positions in Massachusetts. And actually that is the longest tenure of a Senate president. And during that time, I think his two greatest accomplishments were to restore the Boston Public Library, which had fallen on hard times and was in danger of closing in the mid-1980s during a budget crisis. And it was thanks to President Bulger that the Boston Public Library has been restored and has become really one of the great research libraries and public libraries in the country. And the other, I believe, was the Massachusetts Education Reform Act of 1993, which he was instrumental in sponsoring. It allows for charter schools and other educational innovations. And subsequently, he was appointed by the trustees of the University of Massachusetts to be the president of the University of Massachusetts. And under his tenure, the endowment of the university increased significantly, and we're delighted to have him with us tonight. I could go on, but you wouldn't believe it. So we're really honored to have William Bulger with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, do I begin? Or?
You begin.
And okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your hospitality this evening. It's an honor to have been invited to be with you. And I'll try to give, in some orderly fashion, a little bit of a recounting of the part of Boston history that I'm most familiar with, that occurred during my many seasons in public life, and maybe a little bit about Barb Alison and I have written a little book about James Michael Curley, and I could tell you a little bit about why I really liked Curley very much. Curley is a man who he went to jail, and recently somebody told me, I hadn't even been aware that I had written this into the book, but because I sort of I loved Curley as a young fellow. Someplace I wrote in the book, and he liked this. It was Dr. Shields, his name is. He's the president of the the Clover Club. You know, the Clover Club. It's really just it's really nothing. I mean, everybody gets dressed in a tuxedo and goes to a get-together at the Park Plaza, and otherwise it's nothing. And but anyway, he loved this little sentence. He told me about it because I had said I wasn't going to let anything disturb my nice recollection of James Michael Curley. I always liked him. I said my own memories of Curley, and I suspect the memories how many hold of him, are positive. He said, I love this sentence. He says, I am not going to disturb the memories or to replace them with the sterile certainty of fact. So there'll be none of that tonight. If you have facts, keep them to yourselves. So, but Curley, I really thought he was wonderful, and just a few words about him, and maybe just to get us to talking. Curley's born back in 1874. And he's born in Roxbury, down near where the Boston City Hospital is, the mud flats down there. Tough old area. Both of his parents came from Ireland, from County Galway. Her name is the mother's name is Sarah Clancy, and the father is James Curley. And they meet here and are married. And Curley is born in 1874, and he's part of the big migration into the city during the 19th century. And he they have a very tough life of it. And to make matters worse for the Curleys, the father is challenged along the line to engage in some lifting of a heavy, big stone. He foolishly does it, and he drops dead from a heart attack in the process of this competition over the lifting of a stone. And Curley himself is 10 years of age, and the toughest part of all is he now has to become really the support of his mother and a couple of younger siblings. He has a tough life of it, but he works, goes to school, and I really liked him. I liked his life. I used to see him around in his older days, and where he'd be giving a speech in South Boston. There was a water trough up at Flood Square in South Boston. He'd stand up there and give great speeches, and wherever he was, I think I'd show up somehow, and I was only very young. And and then someplace around the turn of the century, I'm going to make this real fast about his life, though, around I think it's the year 1900, he's now about 26 years of age, and a friend of his, Tom Curley, not a relation but same name, they go down to the post office. There are a couple of Irishmen who want to work for the post office. And Tom Curley and James Michael Curley know that they're quite capable of lugging a bag around, but they're not capable of passing the exam. So they step in place of these two people and, in violation of the law, take the exam for them. And they're caught. And they're sent to jail by Judge Lowell, who imposed a sentence of, it's either 60 or 90 days, I forget now, I don't know why, but anyway, they're both sentenced to Charles Street Jail. And it's an interesting time, because they're both up for re-election, and they're both re-elected while they're in Charles Street. And by then, Curley's reading, and he's got a good mind. There's a gentleman named Mr. Pettigrew. He's in charge of city institutions, and he comes through and he sees James Michael Curley, and he goes back and he tells some people, and they all have a memory of this. He said, "I'm an old man. I won't be around to see that man Curley grow up." He said, "But you watch. You'll all hear from him." He's sitting here, and Curley was reading Shakespeare, and he was reading the Pilgrim's Progress. John, give me his last name. I'm not hearing that clearly. Bunyan, of course. And yeah, so John Bunyan, and Curley liked him especially. I think he was in prison when he wrote it. I'm not sure, but he also served time, I believe Bunyan did. So, but that was a favorite of his, Pilgrim's Progress. And so, but Pettigrew says, "You watch. You'll be hearing a lot from him." And indeed, when he came out, Curley went back at it. He became a congressman. From South Boston, actually. He was running against a fellow named McNary. We knew a little bit about McNary. He used to play baseball on the playground named after McNary. McNary got Curley into a fight. He wanted to have him in the battle. McNary had a lot of votes in South Boston. Curley came from Roxbury, where the challenges were. In order to cut the vote, they got Curley to get on the ballot. Curley got on the ballot and decided he'd like to not only be cutting up the vote, he'd like to get enough of the vote to win, and he did. And he became a congressman. And just a couple of things about why I think I always liked him was this, that when someone does something like what Curley did, takes an exam, convicted, he's a felon, it's serious business, and there's no making excuses for him. I recognize that. And he should not have done it. But there's a tendency on our part, on all of us, I think, we impose, I think, life sentences. I would myself, I think, if I weren't inclined to think a little bit more about it, but we'll be totally unforgiven. And if he gets into a competitive world, a political world, as he certainly chose to do, then he's going to be hearing about it all of the time. And indeed, throughout the rest of his life, he, Curley, paid the price for that action of his back there. Now, I will say, when he was running, he ran for mayor in 1914, defeated a young fellow from South Boston named Kenny, wasn't a very good candidate. Curley was always being harangued by people that stand in the back of the hall. How come, you went to jail, But Curley was very, very good on his feet, gave great speeches. And he said, I did it for a friend. That's what he would say. I did it for a friend. Pretty soon he was so good at explaining it that if there were no hecklers in the audience, he'd get one. Make sure that and then did it for a friend. There was no money involved. That's a good part of it. He didn't get anything for it other than endearing himself to this fellow who would be politically loyal thereafter. So, excuse me, and by the way, just jumping ahead, 1961, I was among those in the legislature when Jack Kennedy came as the as President-elect of the United States, and he gave a very important speech. It was the City on a Hill speech. It's still, a portion of it is on the rostrum in the House of Representatives. And I was in the chamber that day, Jack Kennedy speaking to us. We get sworn in, I think, the first Wednesday or something in January, and the President, as you know, is sometime around the 20th of January. So he's the President-elect. We all know who Jack Kennedy is. We're elected, all of us, at the same time as he. I was elected for the first time the same day he's elected. And he, by the way, he talked about he's going to Washington to this high office. He hoped to take with him these various things that he has picked up here in Massachusetts, and among them are these virtues, these qualities of, and he names 4 of them and speaks of them. 1, courage. And 2, he speaks of integrity. And 3, judgment. He has a lot to say about judgment. And finally, dedication to his public purpose. And he speaks of those so eloquently that day. The speech was so good that I even knew people who, the father, Joseph Kennedy, was very disappointed. He said, why? He said, you're using your best speech. You're up there speaking to them, us, politicians. And why don't you do it, So elsewhere, where you'll be more appreciated or something. So nevertheless, he had given the speech, and these are the... But the quality of courage, just to hearken to that for a moment, I just thought that Curley had enormous courage. And I really like that, because if you don't have that particular virtue, you can't really follow through on the others. Because more frequently than not, it requires a certain amount of courage to do the things that you should do. So, and I thought I saw that in him, growing up and my life there in South Boston. And then, by the way, now Curley is elected, and then in 1918, the Republican legislature, I'm going to try to get through his life a little bit here, but in the legislature does not want the likes of James Michael Curley. Curley is not, he's an honorary character. He believes that when and everybody concedes this about Curley, when he's the mayor, he's the mayor. No one else is. The Boston Globe is not the mayor. The bankers on State Street are not the mayor. And all of the rest of them, they may be able to make a suggestion, but he is the mayor. And that's to his everlasting credit, in my view. And by the way, those are the people who will, they're not going to attack him and say, we don't like him because we can't run him. No, they will say they don't like him because he's a dirty crook and he went to jail and all the rest. And the rest of us good people never went to jail. Look at how terrible he is, and so on. He's, where we come from, he's tainted by original sin, something like that, and very imperfect. But we're all imperfect, I think. So that was, again, but the legislature says the mayor of the city of Boston cannot succeed himself. Curley, really, I told this to Menino. I saw him last week, and I said Curley would have been there for 5, 6 terms, but he can't succeed himself because the legislature disallowed him. So he goes out in 1918, he comes back in 1922 and defeats a fellow named Murphy, becomes mayor for a second time, and out he goes. Then he decides he's going to run for governor against Alvin T. Fuller, and he loses, and it's a very exciting race. Fuller's a very rich, well, he's got at least business, and a Yankee businessman, and Curley has a great time attacking him, and it's a good fight and a good story, but we'll leave it for another day. And Curley comes back, and then in the in the 20s, he's with Al Smith for president in 1928, and then a big thing happens in his life. He meets FDR on a train coming up. Roosevelt was coming up to see his sons at Groton, and Curley met him and really was struck by FDR and decided he would be the president. So in 1932, even though everybody in Massachusetts was with Al Smith one more time, even though he had just been wiped out running for the presidency in 1928, they all go to Chicago to the convention in 1932. Curley goes to the convention, but they won't even let him in. He's persona non grata with all of the people, because he is now with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the governor of New York, and people are very angry with him. Governor Ely, who was the governor of Massachusetts, is the one who's putting the name of Al Smith back into nomination in Chicago, and he won't even speak to Curley. And Curley, by the way, then does what he's very good at doing. He comes back as the head of the delegation from Puerto Rico. Jamio, Miglio, Curlio. And everybody in the Massachusetts delegation, which was seated down in front of, they all look back, and there's Curley running the delegation. And from Puerto Rico, senors and senoritas, he goes on and on. And of course, Roosevelt wins the nomination with Curley's help. Curley comes back to Boston. He's a hero again, and all of that sort of thing. And by the way, it's during that time he's great speaking voice, Curley. He speaks about the forgotten man. Much has been said of the forgotten man. Naturally, I have been a bit interested in him myself. Some have asked, who is he, and where is he? And I have made it my business to make inquiry. To those who are unfamiliar with his existence, I want to say that within the last 30 days he could be found within the shadow of the national capital at Washington, to the number of 15,000 sleeping in the open. To those who might visit the greatest industrial city in the whole world, the city of Detroit, he might be found with his dependents to the number of 600,000 out of a population of 2 million, or almost 1 in every 3 of the men, women, and children in the city of Detroit. To those who might journey to the richest city in the entire world, the city of New York, he would find the forgotten man and his dependents to the number of 1,300,000, subsisting on public charity, victims in the richest land of the whole world of Hooverism. And on he would go with the speech of the forgotten man. He gave it all across the country, and Roosevelt, of course, becomes the president of the United States. And Curley now, I think, wants to shake off this ancient curse, and he would like to be something else. He wants to be actually Secretary of the Navy, and he's got this big ambition. He's worked hard for Roosevelt. He thinks Roosevelt owes it to him, but Roosevelt won't do it. And I believe it's because he has been stained by this conviction 32 years earlier, and Roosevelt doesn't want to do it, doesn't understand this. And by the way, I don't want to sanctify, I recognize Curley is a very imperfect human being, but he was, again, a hero of mine, and I speak of it because it's one of the things that got me going into politics so many years back, and that might be of interest to you. So and then, by the way, at some time in In 1900, he becomes the mayor from 1930 to 1934, and then he's elected governor of Massachusetts. It's only a 2-year term. Then he's great. He works very hard as governor, and he's the governor. But things begin to decline thereafter. He runs against Saltonstall. He runs against Henry Cabot Lodge. And he runs against Morris Tobin for mayor. Morris Tobin was a young fellow from Mission Hill and had worked for Curley. And things have been going rather badly for him. It's during that time that the inspiration, that's part of his story, inspires Edwin O'Connor to write The Last Hurrah. It's about this part of Curley's life. By the way, then in the 40s, Curley's back. He runs for Congress a couple of times, but people like South Boston, Charlestown, East Boston, the North End, fiercely loyal to him. I still remember coming across, after I was just out of the Army, and met Joe Moakley, congressman, my friend, and he said, could you give John Powers a vote for? I said, oh, I says, the only time Curley's name is going to be on the ballot, I'm voting for Curley. And Moakley thought I was crazy, but I did vote for him at that time. But the people in Charlestown, Curley, things were tough in the early 40s. He lives in the house on the Jamaica Way with the shamrock shutters. Puts his name on the ballot. You can do so. You don't have to live in the district. And if he puts his name on the ballot over in Charlestown, they elect him. They'd still elect him. I spoke about this book over in Charlestown, and somebody in the library said, boy, I wish we could vote for him again. And I said, how many would vote for him today if you could? Whole place, every hand in the house went up. You don't see that very frequently, you know. I was very happy I wasn't coming over to criticize him. And yeah, and so they were, but there was a whole lot of that, you know. And by the way, I enjoyed a bit of that myself. When the press or somebody would be beating you up, there's nice reaction among these people. They would be. I still remember a fellow named Monsignor McNamara. He just come back from Vietnam. He was a chaplain there. A very nice guy, and he was the pastor in our church at St. Bridget's Church in South Boston. And we were seated in this huge hall on Sunday, and he said, how are you going to get elected? He says, I just saw the Globe just endorsed your opponent. And he didn't know anything about it. I wouldn't worry too much about, Globe. And they even criticized, they were endorsing a Republican veterinarian. A Republican veterinarian. And they were chiding me because I had been joking. My slogan was, even though everything is going to the dogs, this is no time to call in the veterinarian. So, and so they didn't, the Globe had no sense of humor about anything. And they endorsed my opponent. I said, that's nothing. I said, wait till you see this week, the Herald's going to, but they have a strange reaction in the constituency. And I still remember he said, look, he stands up there a little while later. I don't want to get into politics. He says, I'm not supposed to. He said, I got nothing to do with it. He says, Tuesday night, he says, you'll be voting. He said, I'm just hoping the ballot boxes on Tuesday night will be bulging, urging them all to vote for me, right out of the blue. I mean, which would you trade? A Globe editorial that no one reads, even the Globe doesn't read its own, and so there's men of unsleeping malevolence in the press. But anyway, but that was typical of the constituency. I don't know why. There's some sort of a spirit of what? I don't know. They didn't want to be pushed around or told how to vote or some damn thing. But it worked. I mean, I was reelected for 35 years, further proof of the power of prayer. Dear God, I was there. So anyway, and I loved the politics. I enjoyed it very much, even though it makes, not the greatest sense in the world. But I was saying to Barb Alison and to his son there that, well, anyway, I've rambled on too much. Please, who has I know everything. Ask a question. So that I just a little. Yes, sir.
This was like one of my papers on John Hyde.
Oh yeah.
John Hyde's impact.
Yeah.
From my research, there's not a lot of things written about John Hyde.
No.
You see the have a great impact in starting a lot of projects with the city to make that transition.
Yeah.
Curly
Yeah.
and the Irish bosses to the new.
Yeah. Well, I think Hines is a very good person, very good man. You know, I know his family very well. You know, Barry Hines works in South Boston at the something center. What is that? Paraclete Center over there. And I just saw him the other night. They're really, but Hines, as you know, succeeded Mayor Curley, and he filled in for Curley. Curley went to jail in the 40s, so I was going to get into that, but I'm going to spare you any more talk about Curley. I mean, I get on, I know it just, I think Hines, you know, he was very good, more of the downtown kind of mayor. He was, I'm not sure. He's sort of a bland.
There'd be a lot of projects that started, the West End renovation, urban renewal.
Yeah.
The Central Artery was starting at his time.
Yeah.
The big deal with the pool was all started. Everything was started at
Yeah,
his time.
that's true.
Pool columns and White's
Yeah.
terms, like
Yeah.
the building block.
That's true. There's a whole lot of the things that got underway. By the way, during Curley's time, there was a whole lot that went on that was very good too. I can assure you that. I'm just going to read one little bit of praise about him, and I don't know. I don't want to make this the biggest deal of the. This is pretty fast, but this is a tribute to him by the Post, the Boston Post. In days when city after city was defaulting in obligations, when faithful employees went without pay for months, when bare treasuries allowed of no assistance to the unfortunate, Boston stood almost alone among the large cities of the country, and living up to every obligation and providing generously for all in need. No matter what the critics may say, Boston kept the faith. Solvency, financial honor, and consideration of those who could not help themselves went hand in hand. If this is a proud record, then Mayor Curley is entitled to the tribute of a grateful people. He developed into an administrative genius. No man could possibly approach him in knowledge of the city problems. For 20 years he has been a deep and earnest student of municipal government. It is not likely we shall see a man with his vast equipment in many years to come. So that was a tribute to him. I think Hines and Collins, they're totally different kinds of mayors, and I'm not sure how to assess them, really. I don't know. Yeah, but the color and the life that Curley brought to the task is great. I also think Curley. I'm going to give him. I really think I saw this quality frequently in people who were in public life. I think. You know, Derek Bach has just written a book about happiness, former president of Harvard. He speaks of one of the sources of unhappiness lies in the fact that people think that if they believe everybody in their government is just giving them the business and cheating them and betraying their public trust and so, then that is a real downer for people. It's a source of huge unhappiness, says Bach. And he's talking about, I think it's the politics of happiness. And his wife, Cicely Fox, has written a book on the subject. Well, he says something about, well, the press should, it probably never will be inclined to do so, but should give some kind of credit where there's some due. When something has gone right, it should cite it and I think he's asking for it to be, these are my words now, more balanced. I can just tell you that I don't think we'll ever see that. You know, Thomas Jefferson, can I have very few words about the press? I abominate the press, you know, so I'm going to give you a real. But Jefferson wrote a letter to a friend of his, John Norvell, in 1807. Does anybody know that letter? But, you know, Jefferson's the champion of the free press. He is it. He knows. And he recognizes he would never do anything to disturb its. But he says, the man who never looks into a newspaper, he tells his friend John Norvell, is better informed than he who reads the newspaper, inasmuch as he who knows nothing is better informed than he whose mind is filled with falsehood and error. That's Jefferson. He says, truth itself is suspicious for being found in that polluted vehicle. My kind of guy. Obviously reading the Herald. And then, you've read the, has anybody here ever seen the Herald? No, and you're honest enough to say it. I'm only, but you know, I mean, I still remember going back, the Herald, we had looked at the ancient copy. I didn't read the Herald. I did, and the couple of them over the Herald, one of them, the talk master, just hates me with a passion. But he had described me. He used the adjective corrupt over 1,000 times in the copies that when the lawyer I had some lawyers and they were talking about whether you sue or you don't sue and all that. But there's no law of libel, as you know. In this country, we've just about wiped it out because the case of New York Times versus Sullivan in 1964, it's almost impossible if you're a public person to prevail in a suit of libel, so you don't bother with it. But it's but happily, lots of folks come to their own conclusions. But that's our friend Jefferson speaking to, and by the way, when he finishes at the end of the letter to his friend John Novell, he says, look, he says, I'm not afraid of these bulldogs, he says, but please, everything I've said, keep it to yourself. I value my tranquility. And so he's even smart. He's smart enough not to say it. I have to go and memorize it, and use it in all my speeches, you know. But you know, it's the nature of news. A couple of little, just a quick. Here's Demosthenes. He's giving a speech around 350 B.C. Famous, most important, the speech defending himself and his value to the public. And it's the crown oration. Very briefly, somebody's attacking him all over the place, and he says, you know, he says, while I was under attack, he tells his audience, he says, boy, you listened, you surely, and now I have to tell you what a good guy I am, and no one wants to listen. You're all looking how can I get out of here? No one wants to hear it. But when Aeschines, that's the fellow who's attacking him, when he was talking, you all listen. Why, he said, because men have always had an ear for gossip and invective. And the press knows that, and the press sells its product with that. I mean, that's our human nature. That's the one constant of all human history, human nature. And it doesn't change from the time of Demosthenes or even our friend Derek Bach, Jefferson in the 18th century. You know, this one last reference to somebody writing about the press, Dr. Samuel Johnson. In the 18th century, he's writing, the duties of a journalist. He said, the journalist has the obligation to tell the truth, the same as that of the historian, to tell the truth. It's a wonderful little essay. It's about a page and a half of the duty of a journalist. And then he says something I thought was very interesting. I'm not sure. I've thought about it a lot. He says, you know, he said, these scribblers, first of all, he laments the fact that they are always claiming there was robberies, burglaries, and all these things, and he's claiming these things are not even happening. But they say it to sell their product. And then he says, these scribblers should be taught by some animadversion that to describe everyone and everything as wicked is to foster wickedness, since most people want to be like everyone else. They desire, most men, he puts it that way, wish to be like everyone else. That's how we are. And he says, so if they think everyone is wicked, they are more inclined. I've often thought of it when I saw the real tragic, terrible stuff of a former colleague of mine, a woman senator, who, you know, everybody remembers the pictures. She was stuffing money into her bra and every other thing, you say, well, how did she? I was there when she arrived in the Senate. She was a foe of mine, but she was just not that way. And so I wonder what happened. I really think that people like that. This does not excuse them. It's just, and I'm not condoning that, but I really believe they get the idea someplace along the way that that's what most people are doing. This is the way, because most of us are wondering, what is everybody really? What are they thinking? I can tell you my own experience all those years. Most people are trying desperately to do the right thing. They're all over the lot. They're imperfect and they're failing, and they're very often doing heroic things, but most try very hard to do the right things, and it frequently goes awry. But it's nevertheless, that's what I feel much more optimistic about things than people who, and even Jefferson says, he says, I commiserate with those who think they understood what was happening in their time, when they had to depend upon the press for their impression of it. The only ones who really know are the ones who are there and can observe. That was in the same letter. God almighty, what a rant this is. You people, you must be, it's Lent, so that's why you're here. This is probably some kind of a Lenten, you're probably all in a cahoots. Go someplace and suffer, and here you are. You got your hand up there.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I wrote a paper on Curly.
You did? Yeah.
Downfall of Irish political machines, and one thing that struck me was that Boston is the most Irish Catholic of the U.S. cities, and yet they never had a major, true Irish Catholic political machine. Curly didn't succeed.
No.
Kevin White tried and failed. I was wondering why you think that it's been a positive story.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't think you can't feed the machine. If you can't feed them, civil service and all the rest, people, you'd almost have to have a means of patronage or something, and there's no, it's not the, it's a good point. I don't think Curly ever had a machine. I asked somebody one time, Phil Chapman, his name was, he was a fellow. He says it was in his hat band. And when you're running, it's the ones who happen to be around at that time. They're not working, or and they can help you out. Others, and he I'd say people just they gather around an individual for a while, but it isn't ever. Lamasny probably had a machine. The Mahatma, he was in the West End. Martin Lamasny, he was one of the last. And Curly was rough on. He'd say, I'm the city bosses are not going to run me around. He's one himself, He, I don't know. But no, we didn't, there was no machine, no. There was, you couldn't get that sort of thing going here. No. I was going to say, I thought it was interesting how vitriolic Curly could be. I mean, he's so nasty that, his Ely is a Yankee Protestant. He's the governor of Massachusetts. And supporting Curly accuses Joe Ely of being anti-Irish. I mean, I like Curly very much. But if I were on the receiving end of some of his nonsense, I would probably have a different point of view. But anyway, so and Joe Ely, everybody I ever knew, they like it. So he responded by calling Curly a traitor to the Democratic Party and a hypocrite. His is the desperate attempt to throw into this campaign a racial prejudice to satisfy his own cruel and selfish ambition, Ely asserted. He is a traitor to democracy, exerting all his demagogic influence to disrupt our party and further the election of his friend, and blah, blah. And then he goes on, Ely then listed the various Democratic leaders Curley had vilified over the years: Patrick Collins, John Sullivan, James Donovan, that loved man, James Gallivan, John Murphy, General Edward Logan of South Boston, for whom the airport is named, of whom Curley said he and his regiment were driven aboard the ship to cross the sea at the point of a bayonet. I mean, they went and they fought in the war in Europe, and he's saying they were driven there by bayonet, my God. But, I mean, this is truly vintage Curley, it says here, attacking the ward bosses while pushing to have one of the biggest of them, John Fitzgerald, elected governor. I mean, I don't know. So he's... I think the things I like about him, nevertheless, they stand up. When he was the mayor, Edmund Burke says that your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment, and he betrays you instead of serves you if he sacrifices it to your opinion. What he's saying is, you make the judgments. If you're elected, you make them. I can remember sitting down with Governor Weld. We were going to do redistricting. We were just getting to know each other. He says, we can't change any cities or towns, borders or something. I said, who said that? He said, well, I promised that. I said, to whom did you make that promise? He said, the press. The press? Governor, who elected them? Why are you making such promises to them? No one elected them. They are not in it. Speaker Flaherty and you and I will decide. We were elected. And I can remember Wells saying to me, oh my God, this is good. He says, I never thought of it that way. And he told me like 6 months later, we became very good friends, Governor Wells and I. And I remember him saying to me, geez, the day you laid it on the line about the press wasn't going to be involved in our deliberation, they're not going to rule by intimidation, or they're going to smear you, or whatever. I said, he said, that was the day I knew I was going to really enjoy this job. And then we had about 5 or 6 years there. He and I, it went very, very well. He's a zany character. Well, you know, jumping into the Charles River, fully clothed to show it wasn't polluted, you know. What'd you think of that? He said. I said, where I come from, they throw the net over people for that kind of thing. Weld, you know, diving into the river. Harvard, you know. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, gee. Hey, can I put the blast on a professor from Harvard? No, you don't want me to do that. Can I do that? 1990, Dukakis is going out of office, and he decides he's going to appoint, at my request, one Paul Mahoney, a judge. Mahoney is my administrative assistant. A darn good guy. Comes from East Boston, and then out of the blue comes a professor from Harvard, Professor Dershowitz. And he decides Mahoney is not going to be appointed governor. And Mahoney, Dershowitz starts blasting away in the press at Mahoney. And I have, because I knew I was coming to Harvard, he's on the Ted O'Brien show here, and he's the guest. Welcome, Alan, to the Ted O'Brien program. It's always a pleasure to be on. And he says, you're describing this judicial nominee as a henchman, a thug? Those were his, a henchman and a thug. Well, I don't know. Anyway, he goes on. This guy Mahoney is the wrong person to be on any judgeship. And he goes on attacking Mahoney. He says, for example, I know this. I'm here to tell you that Mahoney doesn't belong on the bench, and that nobody associated with Bulger's office ought to be nominated, etc. You know how embarrassing it's going to be to see Mahoney indicted after he is sitting on the bench? You know how embarrassing it's going to be? Now, may he be? He will be indicted. And this is the nonsense that he is spewing forth before Mahoney has to have a hearing at the governor's council. You know the Governor's Council, Massachusetts, that's where the nominations go. In the United States, you know, it goes before the Senate. Here's the Governor's Council, which is a body that's there since colonial times. It was there to keep a check on the governor, who was appointed by the Crown. Now, of course, the governor, as everyone at Harvard knows, is not appointed by the Crown. He's elected by the people, but still we have a Governor's Council. And the Governor's Council is the place to which the nominees for judicial appointment have to go. And but day in and day out, thugs, henchmen, all of this, day in, and time after time, and so then Professor Dershowitz decides he's leaving Harvard, and he starts saying he's going to go over to the State House, and he's going to show up at the hearing, the Governor's Council hearing, to set the council against Mahoney. Well, you know, of all, I mean, I for years had been under attack from Professor Dershowitz, but always through the press. He would write a column in the Boston Magazine. He told them I was the head of the mob. The head of the mob, the real godfather. And on it went. And now he was coming to the State House. Oh, I can tell you, I like direct confrontation. I've had tons and tons of it. And to be able to confront him personally, it was going to be a joy. And so we went to the State House, and he came in. Oh, the drums were beating, and everybody, he's on the second floor, he's coming up to the third floor, and he's coming in, all the TV, everybody following the professor. And I said to myself, oh, how there must be a God. To send the professor into me like this. And so I made a preemptive strike on him. This is the very first time. He had chosen the weapon, the stereotyping. We were thugs and crooks and all of this. So this particular day, I gave him a little dose of his own medicine. I told the Governor's Council, because, by the way, all of this stuff was aimed at, for example, what I read to you on the O'Brien show was to intimidate the council into not passing favorably on Mahoney, which would have been an awful thing, because Mahoney then would have lost his reputation. He was about 50 years of age, and if he were rejected by the council, it would look as though he must have done something wrong. It's a very serious matter, in my view, for Dershowitz. While I do joke about it, I have to say, and I do have fun with it, it was very serious business. And I wanted the Governor's Council to know that I was not afraid of him, and that they should not be intimidated by him. He's coming over with all of the air of coming from Harvard University and all of that stuff. So I began to give him a dose of his own medicine. I witnessed the crafty Dershowitz and his followers, true connivers. I'm giving all these awful stereotyping stuff. Exactly. He had chosen the weapon of stereotyping, and I was using it on him. And I know the whole world tiptoes around him. They know that he's going to start immediately. And he told me, he said, that's it for you. He says, I'm reporting you to the Anti-Defamation League. I says, that's good, because I'm reporting you to the Knights of Columbus. And the headlines the next day, Dershowitz to go to the ADL. I happen to know the guy who's running the ADL. And I said, he called me. He said, what? I said, look, don't get into it. I said, because it's just crazy. I said, if you're really, unless you're just against certain kinds of defamation, you really should be talking to him about the defamation of Mahoney. I said, Mahoney has something at stake. He doesn't. But oh, the newspapers, the Globe admonished me for saying these things, and the Herald and everybody But to have a real live Harvard professor right there where he has to stand up and be counted, it was a joy. And I have to tell you, I'd do it again if ever the opportunity arose. Well, there's a whole lot more to it. The headlines in the Globe, they were righteously indignant about what I had said. Never, they don't even hear what is said about Mahoney or me. No, they don't even have because it's open season. Whereas you have to go, and I think that Dershowitz is emboldened by that. There's a double standard here. You have to be very careful what you say about him, but to hear him talking. This is the headline in the Globe. Those New York Jewish lawyers never had a chance. Why the hell should they ever have a chance to destroy the reputation of Paul Mahoney? And by the way, he said that Mahoney would be indicted in that hearing in 1990. I'm back at Harvard here 20 years later. There's never been an indictment. I would love to know why no one takes him to task. No one, for the fact that he lied to the governor's council to see if he could hurt Paul Mahoney. Not a word. Mahoney was, by the way, unanimously went onto the bench. You know, the governor's council recognized that they had a true liar in front of them. And when they unanimously approved the Mahoney nomination of Michael Dukakis, and then Mahoney sat on the bench for whatever number of years, and he retired a couple of years ago at age 70, which is mandatory, and he did a wonderful job. He was just a top-notch judge. He became a presiding judge in the East Boston court, and just a top-notch individual. But he would have had, not only the judgeship would became a matter of unimportant, but his reputation would have been destroyed had the governor's council believed this Harvard professor. So if any of you see the Harvard professor, he's on the, I mean, I joke about, I always say that Harvard has the best sense of humor in the world. The best sense of humor. It has Veritas as its logo and Dershowitz on its faculty. They have to have a sense of humor. And but if ever you see Dershowitz say, Bulger said after 20 years you should face history and face yourself. That's one of the nonsense that he's... What is that?
Today or something.
Oh, he's in the news today because he's taking on a case where he claims there's false evidence. He should be an expert on false evidence, you know? In Ukraine. Yeah. He's a self-promoter of the highest order. He'll do anything to be in the newspaper. And I don't know anything about the case other than the guy, presumably somebody was shot as a result of this guy giving the orders. And that's the thing for which he may be accused. And Dershowitz says it's false evidence, all of which is interesting. It may be. But the fellow who's over there in Ukraine probably doesn't even know who this guy is. He's the self-promoter. He's a faker. And he's on the faculty at this school. Now, I hope I'm not starting any trouble. But you know, there's something cathartic about saying it over here. And be sure that film, make sure that film gets over to the law school. Okay? It's a joy to have been here. And I'm so happy. When I knew I was coming, I went and got a few of the headlines. And you know, the big sissy, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. Geez, you go in, you have a little argument with him, and he's going to the... You know, like going to tell the teacher, you know what I mean? He starts the fight. And then I'm going to the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. Well, I don't know what kind of... he really insults the Anti-Defamation League. He's the one doing the defaming. And they're not going to, I don't think, be inclined just on the basis of some ethnic identity, religious identity, favor his wrongful claim. I don't think. So, yes?
Will you take a little break?
Absolutely. You can take, they'll never come back. You know where they're going right now? They're going right over to law school. Okay.